I don't know what to do.
Okay, I'm just gonna freeze it so that it's distracting.
All right, we're connected. Great, thanks. I'm gonna disconnect here.
Thank you. Okay, well, if we could do is everybody could go mute except for Jerry, who's going to be asking questions. And then Andrew will be mute until we stop. And then after we stop, we'll go ahead and do that. I'd like to welcome you to our moot court today. It's going to be 100 years for the anniversary of President Kennedy's birth on Monday. In celebration of this, we are going to have a moot court about the Warren Commission. And we're going to start at the two schools involved are Del Valley High School in Del Valley, Texas, which is a suburb of Austin, and Sisler High School in Manitoba, Winnipeg, Manitoba. And we also joining us is Dr. Jerry Croft from the Santa Clara University. Okay, today for Del Valley, we'll have two speakers, Adonis Birch Franklin and Madison Alberstein.
I see you, Michael.
Okay, I will try to go here towards, I don't know if we need gallery view. I'll just go to speaker view, okay?
May it please the court, Your Honor, I, Adonis Birch Franklin, my partner, Madison Alberstein, will present a case against the Warren Commission report. I will first give a brief background of the Warren Commission and then address the first point of error. A brief statement of the facts. President Lyndon B. Johnson appointed the President's Commission on the assassination of President Kennedy, commonly called the Warren Commission, by Executive Order 11130 on November 29, 1963. Its purpose was to investigate the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. President Johnson directed the commission to evaluate matters relating to the assassination and the subsequent killing and alleged assassin and to report the findings of the conclusions to him. On December 13th, 1963, Congress passed Senate Joint Resolution 137 authorizing the commission to subpoena witnesses and obtain evidence coercing any matter relating to the investigation. The resolution also gave the commission the power to compel the testimony of witnesses by granting immunity from the prosecution to witness and testify under compulsion. The commission, however, did not grant immunity to any witness during the investigation. The commission acted properly to obtain staff. Staff met its needs. Jalen Rankin, former Solicitor and General of the United States, was sworn in as general counsel for the commission on December 16th, 1963. He was aided in his work by 14 assistant counsels who were divided into teams to deal with the various subjects and areas of the investigation. The commission was also assisted by lawyers, International Revenue Service agencies, a senior historian, an editor, and a secretarial and administrative personnel who were assigned to the commission by federal agencies as it was requested. Officials and agencies of the state of Texas, as well as the federal government, fully cooperated with the commission on its work. From the first, the commission considered its mandate to conduct a thorough and independent investigation. The commission reviewed reports by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Secret Service, Department of State, and Attorney General of Texas, and then requested additional information from federal agencies, congressional committees, and state and local experts. The commission held hearings and took the testimony of 552 witnesses. On several occasions, the commission went to Dallas to visit the scene of the assassination and other places. The commission presented its report in which each member concurred to the president on September 24th, 1964. The conclusion of Warren Commission were made because of the political reasons rather than the physical evidence of what took place in Dallas in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. There are two basic facts to this case. First, as on As of January 20th, 1964, the Warren Commission had yet to hear from its first witness. On the day, the head of the commission, Chief Justice Earl Warren, held its first staff conference with the recently hired lawyers, some of whom would later go on to be prominent political figures. In the meeting, Earl Warren explained why he took the job after declining. According to one memo of the meeting, Warren said, "The president stated rumors of the most exaggerated kind were circulating in this country and overseas. Some rumors went as far as attributing the assassination to a faction within the government wishing to see the presidency assumed by President Johnson. Others, if not quenched, could possibly lead the country into war, costing 40 millions of lives." When explained the role of the commission, Warren placed emphasis on importance of quelling rumors and preluding further speculation, such as which has surrounded the death of Kennedy. He emphasized that the commission had determined the truth, whatever that might be. Thus, the central conduction of the commission was laid out before the staff began its work. Quenched rumors that could lead to war, and determine the truth, whatever that might be. If Oswald was indeed the lone assassin, these goals would be compatible. If not, which would override the other? Please cross-apply the fact that these statements were made by the head of the Warren Commission to staff members before they had ever heard the testimony. Now added to this, and the fact that on January 11, 1964, J. Lee Rankins, the General Counsel, supplied the commissioners with an outline and proposed report. I ask you, can an investigation have a conclusion before it gets started? The proof that the Warren Commission predetermined Oswald's guilt comes in a series of outlines and inter-commission documents which were written before it had ever been heard. The first of these documents predetermining Oswald's guilt is a tentative outline which was prepared by General Counsel J. Lee Rankins and attached to a progress report dated January 11, 1964, from Commissioner Chairman Earl Warren to the other commissioner members, and reveals the extent of which the commissioner's conclusions were formulated prior to the investigation. Two subject headings in the outline are of concern here. Lee Harvey Oswald as the assassin of President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald background and possible motives. Thus, it is apparent that the commission did from the very beginning plan its work on a distant basis, and it would evaluate the evidence from the perspective of Oswald and the assassination of President Kennedy, and it would search for his possible motives. Under the additional hearing evidence implying others in the assassination of suggested accomplices, the commission was to consider only the possibility that others worked with Oswald in planning the execution of the assassination. The outline further reveals that there had been no conclusion in advance that Oswald had no accomplices. From the last category, under the heading suggested that the evidence evaluating from the refugee allegations, and figuring the timing of the rifle shots, we should take into the account the distance traveled by President Carr between the first and third shots. This tends to be a shortened time, slightly, during which the Oswalds would have had to pull the trigger, and pulled the trigger 3 times on the rifle. On January 30th, David Blinn wrote a memorandum to Rankin concerning Oswald's knowledge that Conley would be the president's car and intended a target. The memorandum leaves no doubt that Blinn was quite sure of Oswald's guilt before he had ever started the investigation. He wrote, "In determining the accuracy of Oswald, we have 3 major possibilities. Oswald was shooting at Conley and missed 2 of 3 shots. 2 missing and striking Kennedy. Oswald was shooting at both Kennedy and Conley, and all 3 shots struck their intended targets. Oswald was shooting only at Kennedy, and the second bullet missed and hit the intended target, Conley, instead." The Warren report compelled until the Warren Commission, the Warren report was not completed until late in September 1964, which with hearings and the investigation extending into the period during which the report was set in type. Yet outlines from the final report were drawn up early as mid-March. These outlines demonstrate that Oswald's guilt was a defined conclusion at the time that the sworn testimony was being taken into the commission. Finally, let's take a look at the summary of the indicated report on the Warren Commission, which is titled precisely "The Assassination." The commission has found that Lee Harvey Oswald owned and possessed the rifle to kill President Kennedy and wound Governor Conley, and bought the rifle into the depository building on the morning of the assassination, was present at the time of the assassination at the window from which the shots were fired, and killed Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit in the apparent attempt to escape. Resisted arrest by drawing a fully loaded pistol and attempting to shoot another police officer, lied to the police after his arrest, and coercing important subject matter. Possessed the compatibility with the rifle, which would have enabled him to commit the assassination, on the basis of which the findings of the commission has concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin of President Kennedy. In 1979, the House of Representatives selected a committee ruled that the assassination was probably the result of a conspiracy. Your Honors, as we can see from the evidence presented so far, we pray that you can reach the same conclusions, that the Warren Commission did their job in not investigating the murder of our president. But in the words of Kabachi, the Warren, Rankin, and the others, the public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, therefore making a political investigation, not a murder investigation, and proving the first point of error of the Warren Commission. Now I will let my partner speak.
May it please the court. I'm Madison Alstein and will deliver the second point of error. Please cross-apply all of my partners to Donna Spurge Franklin's arguments. The second point of error is discussing whether the conclusion of the Warren Commission that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone gunman that shot President John F. Kennedy and Governor John Connally in Dallas on November 26, 1963. First, this can be quickly disproved by applying the conclusions of the 1979 House Select Committee on Assassinations, when they ruled that there was a high probability that there was more than one shooter involved in the JFK murder, and that the assassination was a result of a conspiracy. Your Honor, this is not our word on the subject, but the findings of the Select Committee made up congressmen who hear testimony. Cross-apply all the fact that House Select Committee takes out Lee Harvey Oswald as a lone gunman and takes apart the Warren Committee's main thesis in the report. Second, a summary of its indictment is presented in the conclusion of Chapter 4 of the 888-page Warren Commission report, which is titled precisely "The Assassin." I will now read a quote from the report. The commission has found that Lee Harvey Oswald, 1, owned and possessed the rifle used to kill President Kennedy and wound Governor Connally, 2, brought his rifle into the depository building on the morning of the assassination, 3, was present at the time of the assassination at the window from which the shots were fired, 4, killed Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit in an apparent attempt to escape, 5, resisted arrest by drawing a fully loaded pistol and attempting to shoot another police officer, 6, lied to police after his arrest concerning important substantive matters, 7, attempted in April 1963 to kill Major General Edwin A. Walker, and 8, possessed the capability with a rifle, which would have enabled him to commit the assassination. On the basis of these findings, the commission has concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin of President Kennedy. The essential part of the commission's case involved 3 main claims: A, that all the shooting came from the easternmost south-facing window on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository; B, that Lee Harvey Oswald had brought the rifle to work and was on the 6th floor was at the sixth floor window with the rifle at the time of the shooting, and C, that it was physically possible for a lone gunman to have caused all the known injuries with only 3 shots. So now I'll take this time to discuss whether or not the shots were from the sixth floor, as well as the presence of the rifle and the empty bullet shells. There was other strong evidence that at least one of the shooting came from the Texas School Book Depository, the single bullet theory. Many eyewitnesses heard 1 or more shots from the building, and a gunman was seen on one of the upper floors. The idea that every gunshot originated from the building's southeasternmost sixth floor window was, however, merely the Warren Commission's working assumption. The idea had no explicit evidence in its favor and was contradicted by, among other things, the location and nature of President Kennedy's head injuries. Bullet wounds do not match the theory laid out by the commission. The autopsy pathologist consistently claimed that there was an entry wound low down on the back of President Kennedy's skull. There was also a large wound, the location of which was variously described as toward the top, right, and rear of the skull. All of these locations of the supposed exit wound are higher than the entry wound, and are incompatible with a shot coming from above and behind at an angle of about 10 to 15 degrees to the horizontal. Given the inclination of Kennedy's head at the moment of the fatal shot or shots, which is shown in frame 312 and frame 313 of the Zapruder film. The majority of the damage to the head appears to have been caused by a soft-nosed bullet, a type designed to break apart on impact, while all the non-fatal wounds were caused by metal jack bullets, which were designed to remain intact. The shells found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository were all from the same batch and must have contained the same type of bullet. The implication is that either the soft-nosed bullet was fired from elsewhere or was fired from the 6th floor by second gunman, a conclusion equally unhelpful to the notion of Oswald as a lone assassin. The motion of President Kennedy's head. Perhaps the best known evidence of shooting from somewhere other than the Texas School Book Depository is the motion of President Kennedy's head in reaction to the fatal shot. The sharp back to the left movement was revealed when bootlegged copies of the Zapruder film began to circulate a few years after the assassination. It corroborates the statements of many witnesses who claim to have heard 1 or more shots coming from the direction of the grassy knoll at the northwest corner of the Dealey Plaza. There was also no gunman in the window. A home movie by a specter, Robert Hughes, showed the easternmost 6th floor window as the president's car passed directly underneath, no more than 5 seconds before the shooting started. The 3 Texas School Book Depository employees in the 5th floor window are clearly visible, but there appears to be no one in the 6th floor window. Another specter, Charles Bronson, filmed the window 6 minutes earlier, at about the time when the motorcade had been due to pass by. Again, the window appears to be empty. The second flaw in the Warren Commission theory is that for Oswald to have shot his gun, he would have had to have brought the gun with him to work that morning. No rifle at the scene of the crime with a rifle. Other objections were made to the Commission's claim that Oswald, 1, brought a rifle to work on the day of the assassination, 2, was on the 6th floor at the time of the shooting, and 3, fired that rifle from the 6th floor. Oswald carried the rifle to work. Only 3 witnesses had seen Oswald prior to and during his arrival to work on November 22nd, 1963. All of the 3 testified that he had not been carrying a rifle. Buell Wesley Frazier, who had driven Oswald to work, and his sister, Lenny Mae Randall, whose house Oswald had met Frazier at that morning, both claimed that Oswald had been carrying a paper bag, but that bag was much too short to have held the Mannlicher clerical rifle that was discovered on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Jack Daugherty, a colleague of Oswald's who saw him enter the Texas School Book Depository, was adamant that he did not see anything in Oswald's hands. Dallas police officers claimed to have discovered on the 6th floor a paper bag that was long enough to have contained the rifle, but the bag turned out to have no association with either Oswald or the rifle. Frazier and Randall were shown this bag. Both claimed that it was several inches longer than the one they had seen. The bag did not show creases or oil stains consistent with having held a disassembled rifle. The bag that was produced in evidence was almost certainly not found at the scene of the crime. The police officers first came across the alleged sniper's nest, gave confused testimony about whether there was a paper bag nearby, and none of the crime scene photos showed any paper bag in sight. Oswald could not have assembled the bag, although it had been constructed from wrapping wrapping paper and tape used at the depository. The bag could have been assembled at the building's wrapping table, but Oswald did not have access to the wrapping table, so therefore he could not have made the bag. Oswald was on the 6th floor during the shooting. The first sighting of Oswald after the shooting was by 2 reliable witnesses, a police officer and a building supervisor, who encountered him on the 2nd floor of the Texas School Book Depository very shortly after they heard gunshots. The timing of the incident suggests that Oswald was not on the 6th floor during the assassination. Two problems were pointed out with the commission's treatment of the encounter. The commission reenacted the movements of the 2 witnesses who had come up from the 1st floor, and of Oswald, who in theory came from the 6th floor after laboriously firing and trying to hide the rifle. The reenactments were only able to get Oswald to the 2nd floor in time to meet the witnesses by artificially quickening their ascent and by quickening his descent and slowing their ascent. The commission brushed aside evidence from other people within the Texas School Book Depository who would have seen or heard anyone dashing into the stairs. However, the commission failed to do so. Was Oswald seen firing a rifle? Several people had seen at least one person with a rifle on the 6th floor of the Texas School Depository, but only one witness, Howard Brennan, provided an identification that came close to matching that of Oswald's. Brennan, however, turned out to be unreliable and unhelpful. He claimed that the gunman had been standing up when firing, although the half-open window required any gunman to have crouched or kneeled. He claimed to have seen the gunman's trousers, which would not have been visible from Brennan's viewpoint at the viewpoint on the street 60 feet below. When asked whether he had actually seen the firing of the rifle, he replied no. When he claimed that on hearing the first shot, I looked up at the building, I then saw this man I have described in the window, and he was taking aim with a high-powered rifle. I could see all of the barrel of the gun. Brennan's reaction to the first shot is visible in the Zapruder film. Standing directly opposite of the 6th floor window, he watches Kennedy's car go past him to his left. Then at about frame 204, he in fact turns his head sharply to his right, away from the Texas School Depository, meaning that he could not have seen anybody standing at the 6th floor. He failed to pick out Oswald at an identification parade, despite having seen Oswald's picture on television. 2 witnesses, Arnold Rowland and Amos Jones, saw a man on the 6th floor holding rifle who did not resemble Oswald. Rowland saw the gunman a few times before the shooting, when Oswald's alibi almost certainly places him on the 2nd floor, a location which is consistent with his encounter with the police officer and the building supervisor. Moving on to the bullet shells that matched the wounds. The final and perhaps most important element of the case against Oswald required the 3 bullet shells to be matched to the wounds. Several facts soon emerged which greatly constrained any explanation of how a lone gunman at the time available could fire that particular rifle from one particular location and cause those particular set of wounds. Constraint 1, at least 2.3 seconds per shot. The rifle found on the 6th floor was examined and tested by the U.S. Army and the FBI, who found that it was in poor condition. It could not be aimed accurately, and so it was tested mainly for the speed in which it could fire a sequence of shots. In a series of tests by skilled marksmen, the fastest time taken would be 2.3 seconds. The first constraint is that if Oswald's rifle fired all the shots, there must have been a minimum of 2.3 seconds between each shot. Constraint 2, only 3 bullets were fired. 3 empty rifle bullet shells were found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, all of them close to the window in the southeastern corner. 1 unfired bullet was found on the rifle. No other rifle bullet or bullet shells were discovered either in the building, on Oswald's person, or in Oswald's belongings. The second constraint is that if Oswald's rifle was the only weapon used, all the injuries had to have come from no more than 3 bullets. Constraint 3, 3 shots in 6 seconds. Abraham Zapruder's famous home movie of the shooting allowed the timing of Kennedy's progress along the road to be accurately determined. As Kennedy's car passed the Texas School Book Depository, it was hidden at first from the 6th floor window by a large oak tree. There was a period of just under 6 seconds between the car becoming visible to anyone at the easternmost 6th floor window and a moment of the fatal headshot. The fact that Oswald encountered reliable witnesses on the 2nd floor shortly after the shooting meant that he would have had to leave the 6th floor immediately after the headshot. Third constraint is that if every shot is fired by Oswald from the easternmost sixth-floor window, all the shooting must have taken place within 6 seconds. Was Lee Harvey Oswald the lone gunman? So for Lee Harvey Oswald to have been the lone gunman, all of the following constraints had to apply. If any of the statements were contradicted by the balance of the evidence, Oswald could not have committed the crime alone, or could not have committed the crime at all. The Warren Commission attempted to deal with these constraints by devising what became known as the single bullet theory. At this point, I would like to look at the single bullet theory, starting with the location of President Kennedy's non-fatal wounds. President Kennedy was sitting upright until he was shot. His throat wound was far too high, or his back wound far too low, for them both to have been caused by one bullet from the Texas School Book Depository 6th floor, which was 60 feet above the ground. The location of John F. Kennedy's throat wound. The throat wound was located just below the Adam's apple and just above the knot of the tie. Dr. Charles Carrico, who saw Kennedy's throat wound before it was disordered during a trachectomy and before the president's shirt and tie were removed, was asked to point at the location of his throat. This question clarified the location on the record. The Warren Commission preferred to place the bullet wound about 1 inch lower, just below the level of President Kennedy's collar button. This location is contradicted by 1, the lack of an obvious bullet hole in the front of Kennedy's shirt, and 2, by the absence of bullet damage to his tie. There were several slits on the president's jacket, tie, and shirt, but all of them were consistent with having been made at the hospital's emergency room by nurses using scalpels or scissors to free the patient's clothing. The 2 cuts close to the collar of the shirt did not match each other as those caused by a bullet would have done. The cuts in the president's shirt lay directly underneath the knot of the tie, but there was no damage to the knot of the tie apart from the tiny nick from the knot, to the wearer's left. Material surrounding the nick was removed in order to obtain a sample for testing, to see whether a bullet had deposited traces of copper. Although there were traces of copper around the bullet hole in the back of his shirt, there was none on the tie or at the front of the shirt. The damage to the tie, just like the damage to the front of the shirt, was evidently made by a surgical instrument, not by a bullet. John F. Kennedy's back wound was too low. It makes no practical difference whether President Kennedy's throat wound was located. The balance of the evidence places his back wound several inches lower than either location. The death certificate signed by Dr. George Berkeley, the president's personal doctor, who was present both at the emergency room in the Hospital of Dallas and at the autopsy of Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, located the back wound at about the level of the 3rd thoracic vertebrae, which is typically 4 to 6 inches or 10 to 15 centimeters below the top of the shirt collar. The only surviving contemporary report of the autopsy supported this location. The autopsy descriptive sheet made by one of the pathologists during the autopsy was the official diagram of the wounds of the body. It too placed the back wound in this location. The backs of Kennedy's jacket and shirt each contained a bullet hole located between 5 and 6 inches below the top of the collar, which matched this location. Although the jacket had bunched up slightly from time to time during the motorcade, as Kennedy waved to the crowd, it had never bunched up significantly to allow a bullet to enter at the required angle in a photograph taken no more than 1.2 seconds before any non-fatal shot from the 6th floor could have been fired. The jacket can clearly be seen at or very close to its normal position. Button-up shirts tend to be much less flexible than jackets. President Kennedy's shirt in particular could not have bunched up significantly. It had been made to measure, it was held in place by a belt, and it had a long tie in which Kennedy was sitting on. The hot weather would have caused Kennedy to sweat and make the shirt stick to the president's back. The hole in the shirt lined up almost exactly with the hole in the jacket. The back wound was lower than the throat wound. Because bullet wounds can sometimes veer off in unexpected directions on striking an internal object after entering a body, it is convincible, although highly unlikely, that a bullet from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository hit President Kennedy in the back, veered upward, and passed out of his throat. Unfortunately, a bullet following an upward trajectory could not have caused any of Governor Colony's injuries, as a single bullet theory demanded. The unavoidable implication is that Kennedy's back and throat wounds were caused either by separate bullets or by one bullet fired from somewhere other than the sixth-floor window. It also follows that at least one further bullet is required in order to account for Colony's wounds. The facts appear to contradict the Warren Commission's finding: the time available for the shooting, the capabilities of the alleged weapon, and the nature of the injuries. These three factors came together to suggest strongly that the essential part of the Warren Commission's case, the single bullet hypothesis or theory, was not only supported by the evidence, but was not only unsupported by the evidence, but was actively contradicted by the evidence. The failure of the single bullet theory proved that Oswald could not have committed the crime alone, or if at all, and we pray that you find further position in this case. I will now retire and allow for my opposing counsel to begin.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
My question is, you're describing the throat wound and the back wound as two separate wounds. Is that right?
Yes.
So two separate bullets.
Exactly.
But the single bullet theory says differently, right?
Correct. And that is basically what I'm trying to explain is that if this was true, then Oswald could not have been the lone gunman.
But okay, but going back to the single bullet theory, is the single bullet theory alleging that the throat wound and the back wound are the same wound?
It's alleging that both wounds came from one bullet, which could not have.
So it enters his back, comes out his throat.
Yes.
And your theory is that there are two separate wounds.
Yes.
Okay. So if it comes out his throat, where does it enter?
Well, I'm trying to explain that it went into his throat, that it didn't come from the back, it came from the front.
Oh my gosh, okay. Well, if it came through the front, could it have come out the back in the spot that you said?
Yeah.
So okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Winnipeg, go ahead. And you go ahead. We'll go.
Okay, certainly. We're just going to separate here. Can you hear us okay?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to let the student take over now, and we're going to carry on with our presentation.
Is this the opposite point of view?
Yes, we will be supporting the findings of the Warren Commission.
Okay.
So you're not quite in the screen.
Oh, I'm too short.
Well, I'll just adjust the camera. Here, I'll adjust it for you. Tell me when it's on your will.
Okay.
Okay. There. Okay. You good? Okay, good.
Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to just restate what my partner and I will be proving. Then, I will continue to do some introductions about the topic and proceed to discuss the physical and psychological evidence against Oswald. Our two contentions, which are based on the Warren Commission report, is that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated President Kennedy and that he acted alone. So firstly, who was President Kennedy? He was the 35th President of the United States and was a Democrat. He joined the Navy after graduating university and was very popular with the people, but not with the mafia, despite his father's involvement and direct connection to the mafia. During assassination, he was shot in the head and in the back at 12:30 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963, at the Dealey Plaza, passing Texas School Book Depository, and was announced dead half an hour later. The Warren Commission was created by President Johnson on November 29, 1963. He appointed the Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren as the leader of the commission to investigate the assassination of President Kennedy. The commission was to evaluate any matter relating to the assassination and the subsequent killing of the alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. The Warren Commission of 1963 concluded two contentions in the end, and it relied predominantly on their own interviews and not the FBI's. They considered the FBI report, but mostly conducted their own investigations. The commission was also made up of half Republican and half Democrats. And another government committee that investigated the assassination of President Kennedy was the House Select Committee on Assassinations, or HSCA, which was created in 1967. They came to the conclusion that Oswald was a perpetrator, but he did not act alone. They came to this conclusion because of police transmission tape, which was later discredited, which my partner will talk about later. So Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for the murder of Patrol J.D. Tippit on Dallas Street, 45 minutes after the assassination. He was an employee at Texas School Book Depository and was killed on November 24th, 1963, as he was being transferred to the county jail, and was shot by Jack Ruby, who was a local nightclub owner. And now I'd just like to point out that the majority of our research is based upon the conclusions of the Warren Commission, House Select Committee on Assassinations, and the Vincent Bulgoski Landmark Study, Reclaiming History. So some physical evidence that supports Oswald was the perpetrator was Oswald was present at the location where the bullets originated. He was also the only employee at the Texas Book School Depository to not show up after the assassination. By shooting the police officer J.D. Tippit with a revolver, killing him, it shows he was panicked, and an innocent man does not shoot cops just when he was being approached. It shows that he is guilty. Now, a majority of the 552 witnesses from the Warren Commission says that they saw a shot coming from the 6th floor of the Texas Depository. And at the 6th floor of the Texas Depository in the room, they found a murder weapon. They found a gun that can be traced back to Oswald and 3 casings with Oswald's fingerprints. The bullet fragments in the car match ballistically to the gun found on the 6th floor room of the depository, which gun also has Oswald's fingerprints. Now, the gun can also be traced back to Oswald through other means. The make of the rifle is the same as Oswald, which is the 6.5 millimeter Lincolnshire Carcano rifle, and it is undoubtedly Oswald's because of they have documents with his handwriting that experts have analyzed and have concluded that it's definitely his handwriting. And because he bought it through the mail, when he went to the post office to pick it up, they have his signature for the gun. Another point was that the second bullet found on the stretcher, President Kennedy's stretcher, it matched ballistically to the gun found in the depository, which can be traced back to Oswald. Now for the single bullet theory. The theory states that the bullet came from above and went through the right upper back of the president and then out his throat. And then the third bullet would have been the one that killed him and went through his head. My partner will go into more detail about this later. And according to the autopsy report, the wound on his back was 14 centimeters, while the wound on his neck was only 6.5 centimeters long, which supports the fact that the bullet came from the back because entrance wounds are usually much larger than exit wounds. Also, many pro-conspiracy books may try to discredit the Warren Commission by pointing out the discrepancy in the eyewitnesses' reports. However, only 5% of witnesses actually said they heard 4 bullets. People give so much credit to such a small minority. Also, these eyewitness reports are not as accurate as they are given credit for. There have been many experts that have gone to the Dealey Plaza to do tests on echoes, and they have concluded that the Dealey Plaza from the north, south, east, and west corners echoes a lot of the sound. So what they may have heard was just another, the original bullet sound being echoed. Also, in regard to the Parkland Hospital, we would just like to state that the president's throat originally was referred to as an entrance route and not the exit room at the autopsy pathologist determined it to be. But these highly trained professionals were wrong, and research shows that this is not unusual at all. A study published in 1993 in the Journal of the American Medical Association examined 46 cases involving fatal gunshot wounds over a 5-year period. By comparing the post-mortem findings of a board-certified forensic pathologist to the previous assessments made by trauma specialists, the studies found that the trauma specialists made errors about the nature of the bullet wounds, such as the number of bullets involved and in distinguishing between entrance and exit wounds. In 52% of cases, this happened. The study concluded that the odds that a trauma specialist will correctly interpret certain fatal gunshot wounds are no better than a flip of a coin. In truth, as the Dealey Plaza witnesses, the testimony of the Parkland doctors and nurses is highly contradictory and confused. They were trying to save the president's life, not examine his wounds to determine the direction of the shots. Also, the gun can also be traced back to Oswald through a picture, supposedly taken by his wife. Many say that Oswald claimed that the photo was fake and that his face was merely cut and pasted onto the picture. And that many say that the lighting and shadows in the picture are inconsistent, along with the rifle size. But studies by Farid in 2009 and 2010 rejected the lighting and shadows claim. A new study by Farid and his team conducted 3D stability analysis, and it showed that Oswald's pose was physically stable even though it didn't look like it. It also showed that lighting and shadows are possible and the length of the rifle was consistent. Now, our opponent may have talked about the paraffin test, which during the initial investigation, when they did the paraffin test on Oswald, the result for the gunpowder on his cheek came out negative. However, this would prove that Oswald was not the one to fire the rifle. However, studies have proven that the accuracy of the paraffin results is very questionable with scientific evidence. I will give you an example of an experiment conducted in the past that proves this inaccuracy. After the assassination, the Warren Commission directed the FBI to run an experiment using the C2766 rifle, an ammunition which was identical to what was found in the Texas Book Depository, where the subjects fired it 3 times rapidly using similar ammunition to that used in the assassination. They reran both tests on the hands and the cheek, and this time they got a negative reaction on all casts, meaning that there were no traces found on the gunpowder residue, even though they had just used the gun. And now for some psychological evidence that proves Oswald was the perpetrator. Oswald was an unstable reject whose life experiences only showed his ability to kill President Kennedy. As a child, he was neglected as a child and was a part of the Marine Corps for 3 years, meaning he was a marksman and was an extra shot and a sharpshooter. When he left the Marine Corps, he became a known communist. His blatant hate for the U.S. and capitalism was very obvious, and the easiest way to attack the country is to go after its leader. He once tried to defect to the Soviet Union in Europe. He thought that they'll accept him as a spy and that he would be a hero there if he gave them the information about the United States. But to his unfortunateness, he was rejected, and he didn't think that they would have done this, and he is so crushed that he attempts to kill himself later that day. He slits his wrist in his bath hotel. Now this only proves how unstable and mentally ill Oswald was. The Russians saved him and let him stay, but they had the KGB watch over him the entire time, showing their suspicions of him. Even when coming back to the U.S. after getting rejected in Russia. He still had hallucinations of being a hero and being welcomed back. He even practiced what he would say to reporters in his diary. He thought that he would be welcomed back as a hero and everyone would want to know his experiences. However, he was once again disillusioned. Another time he was disillusioned is when he goes to New York and gets rejected from a pro-Castro group there. They thought he was more of a liability than someone who would help them. Also, he tried to assassinate Major General Edwin Walker, who has no connection to the mafia. But he was a hard right-wing extremist. This shows that Oswald has the potential to kill and really shows his hatred for the United States. One last thing. Before the assassination of JFK, or after he came back from Russia, he brought along a woman named Marina. They were married, but their marriage was very unstable. He was abusive to her, and they were in a cycle of her running away, him begging for forgiveness, and her taking him back. And when she finally throws him out for good, he developed this habit of always calling her before visiting as a way of respect. But the day before the assassination, he visits her unannounced and begs for her back. But this is the only time he has ever done this since they fully separated. When she rejects him and tells him to leave, Oswald leaves all of his money and his wedding ring with her, as if he was preparing for a life-changing event. And just to summarize my points, the bullet casing, the bullets, the gun, and the position can all be traced back to Oswald, proving he is guilty. Also, Oswald's life experiences of being neglected as a child, rejection from several places, his unstable marriage, and hate for the U.S. all show how capable he is to have committed the assassination of President Kennedy.
Did you have any questions for Hazel, or we're good? We'll move on to our next speaker.
I just was completely blown away by that. I really liked it.
Okay. That was the form of which we would defend the Warren Commission of Oswald's guilt. Now Carlo's going to discuss a refutation of any other alternative explanations by a conspiracy.
Yes, so I shall be going over the second contention of the Warren Commission, which is that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in this assassination. So John F. Kennedy's assassination on November 22nd, 1963 was a nationwide catastrophe. He was loved by many Americans, and those Americans were heartbroken upon hearing the news of his death. Among those Americans were disbelievers of the cause of his death. It was very hard to believe that the man they once loved so much was simply assassinated by a single shooter. This spawned the speculations and the theories that there was not just a single man that was responsible for JFK's assassination, but a larger group of people. These theories were easy to make, as people are often looking for explanations for the unexplainable. This inclination is natural for humans, as shown throughout history, where humans have created myths, idols, or religions that have helped them grasp a better understanding of how everything works. In regards to JFK, people wish to be able to grasp a better understanding of his death by forming these theories. And believing in these theories also gave people the sense that they have control over the situation. It gives people enough information to let them understand what is happening, but under a potentially deceiving light. People may also follow these conspiracy theories because of a mob mentality, which is the inclination of people to believe what other people believe and to do what other people do. This gives them a sense of acceptability, that an act is reasonable enough for a certain amount of other people. Therefore, it gives them the sense that it is reasonable for them too. Before I go into detail on some of these conspiracy theories, I would like to introduce the principle of Occam's razor, which states that among competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. When considering the case of JFK's assassination, the hypothesis with the least assumptions is the one of Lee Harvey Oswald being a lone gunman. This is the simplest solution because the only The only pieces of physical evidence that has been found have supported this theory, and that is evidence of bullet shells being found around the scene of the crime and fingerprints found on the rifle. Any other evidence showing that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone is simply theoretical or misleading. Now, on to the first conspiracy theory, which was that the Soviet Union was responsible for the assassination. First of all, Lee Harvey Oswald was a bit of a loser. He had delusions of grandeur and was known to be unstable. As Viktor Cherkashin and Vincent Bugliosi point out, he was rejected by the Soviets for citizenship during his defection in 1959, resulting in an unsuccessful suicide attempt. Afterwards, he was reluctantly allowed to stay in the Soviet Union. He was again rejected in 1963 from entering into Cuba, again by the Soviets. Then later in 1963, even the New York City branch of the pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee wanted nothing to do with him because of his instability. He had an idealized and naive notion of the Soviet Republic and his life in this country. Therefore, it is completely implausible that a nation and its subsidiary organizations who rejected him time and time again would hire him to assassinate the President of the United States. Secondly, the United States and the Soviet Union were amid a Cold War at the time of JFK's assassination. During this period of the Cold War, there was major tension between both sides, but they never fully engaged in all-out combat, despite being prepared if the other side had initiated an attack. The reason why the two parties were at a Cold War and not a total war was because both sides feared that initiating an attack would start an all-out nuclear war that would destroy both sides. With this in mind, why would the Soviet Union conspire to assassinate the most important man in the United States when they are fully aware of the consequences? Even if the Soviet Union did conspire to assassinate JFK, history shows that they never fully engaged in armed combat, despite the United States left without a leader. Therefore, how would the Soviet Union benefit from assassinating the president and not capitalizing during a time of vulnerability for the United States? A second conspiracy theory that states that the assassination was by the mob or the mafia. Although there are no confirmed direct connections between Lee Harvey Oswald and to any mob or organized crime. Lee Harvey Oswald was a communist idealist in a way. It makes no sense to assume he would have connections to the mob, as that would have been out of character. His only supposed connection to the mob could have been through Jack Ruby, who undisputedly killed Lee Harvey Oswald. However, no reliable direct connection has ever been made between Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald. Besides, for us to assume that there was a mafia link, we have to assume that it was through Jack Ruby. Taking the assumption that Jack Ruby was brought in to silence Oswald. However, this brings in a type of continuation fallacy, whereby if Ruby was brought in to silence Oswald, then who would be responsible for silencing Ruby, and so on. Moreover, if we have Lee Harvey Oswald's connection to the mob on that already weak evidence of his connection to Ruby, we must also consider the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald and Ruby were not well regarded in the circles that they traveled in either. He was known by his associates and employees to be violent, emotionally unstable, and impulsive. If the mob truly wanted to embark on the outlandish task of killing the president, why on earth would they trust a street-level thug and a strip club owner to kill their equally unlikely assassin? Also, when you consider how the mob typically dispatches its executions, there are several factors running counter in the Kennedy assassination and the LHO assassination. First of all, the mob usually uses their own people. The mafia hires professionals to do their dirty work, and Lee Harvey Oswald was clearly not a professional. And secondly, they typically do not want to be caught. Oswald's plan of escape were very unsophisticated, and his execution of that escape plan was even more amateur. On his escape, Oswald shot a police officer, which drew attention into him, then proceeded to hide inside a movie theater. If the mob were involved in this incident, then Oswald would have an escape vehicle ready. A third conspiracy theory was that the CIA was responsible. Although Oswald left the government service as a Marine, then defected to the Soviet Union, then left the Soviet Union only to realign with the American government, the CIA no less, to assassinate the president, this does not stand to reason. Moreover, Lee Harvey Oswald was a fierce Castro supporter, so why would he align himself with the very organization that tried to overthrow Castro to kill the president? And moreover, why would the CIA use Oswald? He was clearly unstable from his defection, his suicide attempt, his delusions of grandeur that can be seen in his diary, and from many interviews, including his wife. And for this masterful plot, the CIA leave him a sitting duck for capture afterwards, killing a cop to boot. This makes no sense. There has been no credible evidence shown for a CIA connection. And finally, I would like to go over the theory that there was another shooter in the Grassy Knoll. However, the Grassy Knoll multiple shooter conspiracy fails on several accounts. First, let us look at the physical evidence. In frame 312 of the Zapruder film, we see Kennedy's head and body lurch slightly forward due to the impact of being shot from behind. His head does snap back, however, but this can be described in a couple of ways. It's easy to assume that this snap back of his head was caused by a bullet that hit him from the front. Physically, yes, this makes sense, but we must also look at the biological aspect of the shot. We can surmise the initial impact of the first bullet had caused him to lurch forward, and the snap back is a rebounding backward after the body has been pushed forward, not only by the first bullet into the soft tissue, but also from the headshot a couple of seconds later. The House Select Committee of Associations have also landed on this conclusion that there were potentially more than one shooters. However, they based this conclusion on a piece of evidence of a police radio transmission that recorded the waveforms of sound around the time JFK was shot. It recorded 4 sound waves that seemed identical to those of actual shots from the Texas School Book Depository. However, these sound waves could have been any sound, not just the bullet being shot. Furthermore, these waveforms were recorded. It was discovered that these waveforms were discovered not exactly at the time that JFK was shot, but in fact a couple minutes later, as shown by the officer who was talking about the limousine or the vehicle that was currently moving to the hospital. Anyway, the Grassy Knoll, which was found in front and to the right of Kennedy's vehicle, also would have been a far more difficult shot to make compared with the book depository where Lee Harvey Oswald was found, since it is much more difficult to hit a target that is moving perpendicular to your line of sight. Believers of this theory also bring up the magic bullet theory, which is the assumption that it's impossible for the shooter to hit both JFK and Texas Governor John Connally using a single bullet. Therefore, the bullet's trajectory must have curved mid-air, essentially making it a magic bullet. However, this theory is based on the assumption that JFK was sitting directly in front of directly behind John Connally. He was not. In fact, Kennedy was sitting on a raised seat approximately 3 inches higher than Connally's, and Kennedy's seat was also slightly right of Connolly's. This orientation means that the bullet had a perfectly straight trajectory possible to pierce both JFK and John Connolly. In conclusion, these conspiracy theories are simply forms of speculation based on the human instinct to search for an explanation for the unexplainable. Oftentimes, theories rely on irrelevant details that may be weak points of evidence or are not even properly justifiable. In the case of JFK's assassination, most theories can be debunked by referring to the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald was not a professional assassin. Yes, he was more than capable of shooting a gun, but his lack of skills made it implausible for any higher-powered organization to trust him to carry out the largest crime in American history. Referring back to the principle of Occam's razor, the lone gunman theory is one that involves the least amounts of assumptions. Therefore, it is the most realistic. For these reasons, we believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only shooter involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Thank you.
Okay, so now what do we do, Michael?
Okay, I thought we might could ask you a few questions about Kennedy assassination at this point.
I'd like to comment on the speakers.
Yeah, go ahead. That'd be great. Comment.
I want to do it in reverse order. And then I would like to render my judgment. Can I do that?
Yeah, you're the judge.
Okay, here we go. Let's start with our last speaker. What was his name?
Carlo.
Pardon?
Good.
Carlo.
I loved your presentation. Very factual. But here are some weak points. By the way, well, I'm going to just do your weak points. When they showed the movie of JFK getting hit from the front, you say his head snapped back. Well, the motorcycle patrolman who was riding 11 feet behind Kennedy was splattered by blood and brain matter so much that his windshield was covered by it. That could only have happened if Kennedy was hit from the front, not from behind. So you only looked at certain data and you didn't look at other data. Secondly, when you talk about the CIA theory using Oswald, or the mafia theory using this unstable Oswald, neither the CIA theory nor the mafia theory planned on using an unstable crazy man like Oswald. They wanted to set him up as the patsy. So that part of the conspiracy theories you didn't deal with. You just sort of said the CIA theory would be crazy because Oswald loved Castro, and why would the CIA ever hire Oswald to be the killer? But you didn't deal with the possibility that the CIA could have hired other people and used Oswald, the nutcase, as the person who is going to be the scapegoat and to blame this crime on. The same rationale holds for the mafia. Nonetheless, your presentation was excellent, and the way you handled the USSR theory was beautiful. They would have never used Oswald, and you made that point beautiful. And I like the fact that you cited Bugliosi. Now, I want you to know, you guys, I don't agree with you. I think you're wrong, but I think you obviously, both of you, presented the best case, and I'm going to vote for you on this because you nailed this from the point of view. Let's go back to the girl who was the speaker. What's your name?
Hazel.
Hazel, you did a wonderful job presenting physical evidence, a wonderful job on going through the Tippit murder, and you made a great point. If he murdered Tippit, how do you, that's the behavior of a guilty man. So that adds a great deal of circumstantial evidence to the whole thing. You took a good deal with the fingerprints, the receipt of the rifle, the pristine bullet. You handled it all nicely. You did a wonderful job on the psychological profile of Oswald, abusive husband, the nutcase, the suicide case. So you really, if you were an attorney presenting your case in front of a court, you were both of you were very, very persuasive. So I don't agree with you, but I'm voting for you. You were very well prepared, and you nailed this from the Dictabelt recordings all the way through. So now, even though I think that my actual belief is that Oswald was set up, that it was a mafia hit, and you did not. Well, I think my other comments have to deal with the other group. So let me talk to the other group. Where are they? Where's my other group? The anti-Warren Commission people.
We're here.
I don't.
What? We'll wait till he's going to talk to Del Valle, I think. I'm going to mute us.
So the second presenter we have the first presenter who I see in front of me.
And the second presenter had to go take a test. So.
Okay, good. Your first presenter, you really gave a historical background on the Warren Commission, and you did a very good job with it. But I got the impression that what you wanted to do was to say why the Warren Commission was wrong and why they were incorrect and why their assessments were right. Isn't that right? Yeah. Well, you kind of presented the Warren Commission history, and there were a lot of points that I don't think, and you did a very good job of giving us an overview of what the Warren Commission did. But, for example, there are like a dozen things you could have said to win this case, which you didn't say. For example, Jack Ruby was so thick with the mafia. It was incredible how many mafia connections he had. Bobby Kennedy, by the way, investigated organized crime. He said, I looked at all the telephone calls that Ruby made in the 3 months before the assassination. He called virtually every major mafia figure in the country. Ruby was totally mafia, and the Warren Commission never mentioned it. So that's a real weak point of the Warren Commission. You guys should have made that point. I like what you said about coming to a predetermined conclusion that Oswald was the lone gunman. Very nicely stated. I believe that was also the case. There were many, many witnesses who heard 4 shots and 51 witnesses who pointed to the grassy knoll. You guys didn't mention that. You should have mentioned that, because when they said all the shots came from the depository, the Warren Commission excluded a lot of information that they should have included. Let's see. The autopsy report that you did was pretty good. I liked that. You didn't talk about the first shot. The first shot hit a curb. It was 19 feet over the head of John F. Kennedy if it came from the depository. That's ridiculous. Nobody is that bad of a shot. The Warren Commission said, oh, it hit a tree. I don't think it hit a tree. I don't think it came from the depository. It completely missed. It was 19 feet over Kennedy's head. You guys, neither of the two teams talked about the first shot. That was an important thing to not to ignore. So let's go to your second speaker, who's talking, who's taking an exam now. She presented a lot of good substance here. Let's see. She made a wonderful point about the wound below the collar, and how the pristine bullet had to go through his back, out of his throat and into Connolly's leg. And she made that sound ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And she deserves a lot of good points on bringing that out. Witnesses saw nothing in Oswald's hands. That was a very interesting thing. I wanted to ask her where she got that information. There were witnesses who saw Oswald carrying a package, including the lady who drove him to the depository that day. But she presented evidence that there were witnesses who said, I never saw Oswald carrying a package. So that was well done. I would have liked to learn more about it. So all in all, all of the presenters gave very substantive stuff, but I have to give and I believe that Oswald was killed by the mafia, and that, that Kennedy was killed by the mafia, and Oswald was set up as the patsy for the crime. But I'm going to give the award of who wins this debate to the second team, because they really they presented their evidence very, very effectively. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You were all good, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prof. And really appreciate that. Great.
Thank you, Michael, for starting this. And I hope you all become lawyers or politicians.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Croft.
I'm going now.
Okay, bye.
See you, Dr. Prof.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us